Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport, and today was the Italian Grand Prix, which I have just finished watching, and it was an okay race. Not necessarily a lot of battling on track, and the top 8 was the usual top 8, but it was a decent enough race. There was a lot of strategies going on, a lot to keep track of, and in the end, Ferrari took the win on their home soil, which I believe I called right.
I think it'll come down to strategy. Max will pit early and force Lando Norris to counter him a lap later, and their strategy will open the door for Charles Leclerc to take a win in Italy for the second time in his career. Norris and Verstappen complete the podium.
Now, doesn't that make a change? The race itself all came down to strategy, and Ferrari, for what it's worth, it's a rare occasion, they nailed their strategy spot on. It was brilliant. They were brilliant. Charles Leclerc was absolutely brilliant. It wasn't even close in the end, nearly 10 seconds ahead of Piastri. Fantastic drive from the Ferrari. I think everyone was surprised by Ferrari's pace at Monza. We were expecting it to probably be McLaren versus Mercedes, and it really wasn't. Ferrari, I think, really surprised everyone with their one-stop strategy, and they nailed it to perfection. And first and fourth is a great result for them, and with McLaren second and third, it's made the Constructors' Championship much more interesting than the Drivers' Championship. Norris scored points on Verstappen again. He's still a fair way behind, and I would have thought McLaren would have swapped Piastri and Norris, because I think it's clear Piastri isn't going to be champion this year. Norris does have a chance, and I think Piastri constantly finishing ahead of Norris when they have opportunities to swap it, it's not going to help Norris in the long run. Otherwise, it was a great race from McLaren, apart from the start, which, as has been pointed out by people in the comments of my videos and elsewhere on the internet, is a bit of a weak spot for Norris. But he got the start okay, did the first corner right, it was the second chicane, and Piastri got him fair and square. And there were other points in the race where Norris got stuck behind Sainz, I think, for a while, and that pretty much killed any chance he had of challenging for second place. But otherwise, Piastri did a fantastic job, just didn't have the pace in the end to catch Leclerc. So, honestly, it was just an incredible race for Ferrari. Brilliant strategy, brilliant driving, just brilliant all round. The Constructors' Championship, I think Red Bull are only 8 points ahead of McLaren now, and I believe Ferrari are only 35 or 36 further back. So, between those three teams, it's very, very close. And remember, Red Bull, it really is Sergio Perez has been a chain around their neck. He had another very average race. He is ahead of George Russell in the championship, but only really because George Russell got disqualified in Belgium. Otherwise, Perez would be 8th. It shows how bad Russell's season really has been. It's had incredible ups, but he's had a lot of really, really poor races. And the rest of the field, honestly, Mercedes, I'm surprised they weren't more of a threat. They kind of just settled into their midfield place, but they were ahead of both Red Bulls. Verstappen, I'm sure, would have been disappointed that Red Bull just really weren't on it this weekend at any point. And 6th place is damage limitation. I'm sure it's a concern for the rest of the season, but I think we're going to get a much better view of where Red Bull are right now at Baku, Singapore, places like that. So the season's definitely not over. We still have a fight for the championship between Norris and Verstappen. But the Constructors' Championship really is where the exciting action is going on.
I think Alex Albon could be on for points, and after all the drama for Haas, I'm going to be kind and say Kevin Magnussen will get a point behind both Aston Martins. Everyone else will be in the usual places. Another poor race for RB. You won't see Stake on TV. Colapinto will be in there somewhere with Nico Hulkenberg. It really has become a 2-division series in 2024.
Another thing I got right, in the midfield, we got points for Albon and Magnussen, and we would have got points for Alonso as well if one of Perez or, I can't remember, Sainz I think I said, would have dropped out. They didn't, they finished the race, so the only 2 points were up for everyone else. They were taken by Albon and Magnussen. Magnussen finished 9th, but he had a 10-second penalty. It was still a really good drive for Haas. What has been a difficult couple of weeks for them. I think this is a great return for what it's worth. It's pretty much what you expect from Haas to take the odd points finish here and there. So, for Magnussen, great drive. Albon is again excelling. Absolutely amazing. Other people, Alonso, I think, will be disappointed to be 11th. I think Aston Martin just don't have the pace right now. And they were not really a feature in this race. Lance Stroll was nowhere all weekend. Alonso did his best to catch Albon towards the end, but I think he was just outside for 10 seconds behind Magnussen post-penalty. So it was close to almost being a point for Alonso, but I'm sure he's not happy just going for the odd point here or there. For Magnussen, it's a bit of a worry because another penalty might mean he has a one-race ban. I don't know who Haas call in. They might call in Ollie Behrman, or they could go for someone like Mick Schumacher if they could get him. I'm not sure who Haas's reserve driver. I presume it's Ollie Behrman right now. Obviously, Pietro Fittipaldi was their reserve driver for a long time. I don't know who's associated with Haas anymore. As for everyone else, Franco Colapinto finished 12th on his debut. Fantastic drive. That actually puts him above Valtteri Bottas in the championship, which is another mark down for the Finn. And he did nothing wrong. He had a little bit of a moment in qualifying that knocked him out in Q3, but otherwise it's a very clean weekend for the Argentinian. And I think this is a good thing for him to build on. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how he does in places like Baku and Singapore, which may be a bit more technically challenging than Monza. But Monza is its own unique challenge for Temple of Speed. Fantastic track. And it was a great debut for Franco Colapinto. Everyone else in the field, there were no real big surprises beyond that. RB were pretty hopeless at this race again. Tsunoda retired early and Ricciardo was only 13th, which I think he got demoted for a penalty as well. Stake were pretty much nowhere. And honestly, it hardly matters at this point. Hulkenberg had a bad race. He made contact with Tsunoda, so I think he got a penalty as well. It's still a two-division... Alpine. I forgot about Alpine. They're pretty much down in the dumps again as well after their brief resurgence. But yeah, it's still pretty much a two-division game in Formula 1 at the moment. And honestly, the racing wasn't incredible. What's happening off the track is way more interesting in terms of the championship being a bit closer between the drivers and the constructors. The actual racing itself, this race was decent, maybe 6.5, 7 out of 10. And that's better than a lot of Grand Prix that have come before it. But I wasn't overly entertained. It was okay. As for the bottom of the championship, honestly, I don't know if we'll see any more driver swaps before year's end. I can't imagine anyone really dropping out now. There's only, 8 races left. So I think this is the grid for the rest of the year, bar maybe if Magnussen is banned for a race, we'll get someone else in at Haas. I don't see anything real... I don't see any big changes happening to the championship. I think we're pretty much set for the run-in now. This is what we're going to get. And it's quite exciting to see McLaren versus Red Bull versus Ferrari at the front. It'll be interesting to see if Mercedes can close the gap a little bit. But I do think they're too far away. Charles Leclerc, in terms of a title chase, I think he's just shy of 100 points behind Verstappen. So he could be in with an outside shout. But I think he needs other things to happen to close the gap. And Ferrari just to maintain this high-end pace they've suddenly found. And I don't know if they can do that through the rest of the season. It'll be interesting to see, but I do still think it's between Norris and Verstappen. Off the field of play, Andrea Kimi Antonelli has been announced for Mercedes, and I've said it multiple times, I think that's a really bad idea. It was just last year he was racing in Formula Regional Europe, which is, 4 places off Formula 1. He skipped Formula 3. He's been okay in Formula 2. We've seen good drives from him. He actually had a really good drive in a feature race, but his practice with Mercedes ended with him spinning into the barrier. And he got caught up in a crash in race 1 of Formula 2 as well. So I still think he could do with some time to mature. Another year of Formula 2 would do him wonders. He's not going to win the championship, so he could have done another year of Formula 2 at the very minimum. And I do think this is a mistake for him. Maybe he'll be fine. Maybe Mercedes will turf him out in 3 years because it just hasn't worked out. We won't know till next year, but I think it's going to be a rough year for Andrea Kimi Antonelli next year. And I've said it before, I think there are other options Mercedes could have gone with in the short term and played the long game with Andrea Kimi Antonelli. I'll remind you, he has just turned 18. There is time on his side. I think another couple of years and this would have been perfect for... You could even replace George Russell with him if it hasn't really got any better with George Russell. Because it isn't perfect with George Russell. He's kind of at that Daniel Ricciardo level where he's a good driver, he can win races now, but he's not really incredible. I think there was a point when we did look at Daniel Ricciardo and think this guy could win championships, and it just never happened. I kind of get that vibe with George Russell as well. So I could see Mercedes replacing him in a couple of years. And I think there's a missed opportunity with Andrea Kimi Antonelli. The worst thing is, Frederic Vesti put in a fantastic Formula 2 performance last year and has basically been cast aside. Like, they're not going to use him at any point. And he is a Mercedes-backed driver. I can't see Frederic Vesti getting into Formula 1, and that is a great shame. But that's just what it is. You've got Ollie Behrman joining the grid next year as well for Haas. So it's going to be an interesting grid next year. Jack Doohan's coming in as well for Alpine. It is younger. It is more mixed up. It will hopefully make things a bit more interesting. I think there's only really a couple of seats likely still up for 2025. I think Stake haven't announced their second driver yet. And I wouldn't put it past them to bring up Zane Maloney because he is really, really good. He has been unlucky in Formula 2, but he is still in the hunt for the championship. So I could see Zane Maloney getting that seat. Teo Pucher, champion last year, although his career's kind of gone south since in Super Formula and IndyCar. But again, I mean, he's a Sauberback driver. He could end up at Stake. And what's the other seat? I can't even remember what other seats are up for grabs now. I guess it's Toro Rosso RB. And I think that's going to depend a lot on what happens with Daniel Ricciardo, if he's going to stay on another year. They have plenty of decent young drivers like Isaac Hadjar. Even Pepe Marti's a pretty good driver. They got Ayumu Iwasa in Super Formula, who isn't really performing miracles there, but he's not a bad driver. Yeah, I think it could be a really interesting grid next year. I think the next best thing would be if Aston Martin announced they were swapping Lance Stroll with Felipe Drugovich. I think it'd be a really good grid for 2025, especially in the midfield. I don't think we're going to get that. I think Lance Stroll's here to stay for another few years yet, at least. In fact, I think Lance Stroll could probably have the longest F1 career ever, just because his dad's paying the bills and owns the company. So why not? Got to get his name in the record book somehow. I do hope not. So yeah, there are my thoughts on the Italian Grand Prix. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more motorsport. There'll be plenty more coming out next week. Make sure you check out the other content on my channel. There's members only content now if you're feeling brave. And with that, thank you very much for watching and have a good one.